even start thinking about long-term care for a parent?
Yeah.
Where do you begin?
Yeah. It's not a one and done kind of thing. Please understand that if you're asking people what they're most afraid of in terms of aging, they'll say things like dementia and having to go into a nursing home.
You do say you may think you have time, but you actually don't. Things can happen quite suddenly.
Are we trying to hold our parents to our idea of who they are and who they should be? Many people don't realize that the early signs of dementia are showing up about 10 years before any health conversation is had.
The Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth with Kim Parlee.
If you are at the point in your life where you're helping with your aging parents, you know it's complicated. Logistical, medical, technological, legal considerations, often charged with a whole lot of emotion and family dynamics. So maybe you are knee deep in helping, or maybe you aren't sure if, when, or how to start having those conversations with your parents. So what do you do? Where do you start? We are going to tackle all of this with Laura Tamblyn-Watt. She is author of the book, Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real-life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. She's also the CEO of CanAge, an advocacy organization for seniors. Laura, it is great to have you with us.
It's great to have the conversation. It's the perfect introduction because it really is as messy and complicated as that.
It really is. And I call out to your book as we'll show people along the way. It does such a great job at having those real conversations. They're tricky. How did you come into this to begin with? I'll get to why you wrote the book, but how did you get involved in this kind of work? What called to you?
So I've worked as a lawyer in social justice for a really long time. And it's one of those things, if you look backward, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, I understand how that happened. So I worked in social justice and children's rights and women's rights, but I also volunteered with the Alzheimer's Society since I was in high school and all through university. And like so many people who end up in the field of aging, I also had kind of caregiving responsibilities and close connections with older people in my life, 6 of them growing up. So for me, it was quite normalized. It was only later that I realized, oh, that's not always the experience of people. And then when they end up either themselves aging or trying to understand how to navigate those things, they don't necessarily have that comfort level.
So tell me about the book, why you wrote it, and why you wrote it the way you did.
So I didn't really want to write the book. I wanted someone else to have written the book is actually what I wanted. Because as you can imagine from our own conversations we have or bits and pieces that we share amongst friends, it's not a one and done kind of thing. And I was looking for some place to send people when they're asking, what do I do about powers of attorney? And I'm like, okay, I can give you the legal information, but really that's probably a tip of an iceberg conversation. There's probably so much more to it than that. I wanted somewhere to have the hacks, but also the right information, and it didn't exist. Think of all of the baby books we have, the pregnancy books we have, the toddler books we have. And at maximum, you might get, 6 years of your life doing that stuff. There's literally hundreds of thousands of books. I wanted the bedside table book, the 3 a.m. thing that you could reach over to when you're waking up and thinking, Dad should really not be driving. How do I have that conversation? And not just the idea of a romanticized family. Look, I use the term aging parents. It could be any relationships. It could be a spouse. It could be a friend. But it's not this idealized notion. If you've got mental health in your family, you're normal. If you're having the fact that you're still processing the fact that your brother cut the Barbie doll heads off, which mine did, many years later, you're normal. These are not these idealized notions. And I wanted a book that helped people with some straight talk, but still be able to have these conversations in a way to get invited to Sunday dinner.
Yeah, it's so great. And I'm sorry about your Barbie doll head. Are you guys okay now?
Mostly, he's almost 60. We're nearly over it. Yeah. But, you think about those pushing the buttons questions, right?
Yeah.
And it's, because your family, or whether that's family of choice or your biological family, those are the people that installed the buttons in you. And I asked my dad the other day, who's 88 and a lawyer, how old do you kind of think I am? Right? I'm 54, by the way. He's like, can probably drive to probably something like 17. And that's important because that's the age that I last lived at home. And I think a lot of people have that experience. You walk into your parents' home and all of a sudden you're that teenager or that kid and your siblings are pulling each other's hair. And that's just normal.
Yeah, and it's funny. I literally had the same conversation with my mom, who I love dearly, and she, was talking to me, and I just kind of said, "Well, I've done all these things," and you're right. She's reacting to me like I was in my 20s, and I'm not in my 20s. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm 55. I'm just not far off from you, Laura. So, you actually talk about in the book, and I want to get through as much as we can, so it's useful for people. You say there's kind of two extremes that people tend to do. They either say when they start working with their parents, it's either do what I say, or I'm going to wash my hands of all of this.
And those work in other ways. And while I never, ever compare working with parents or older adults and children, and I don't, but think about if you parented your kid that way. Believe me, I've wanted to parent my kids like that. You know what? Do what I say, or, we're out the door. You can't do that. That's not how we do. So it's really important to remember that as we are all aging, imagine what you would like someone to say to you. And unsurprisingly, you think you're, at least your mentally 17-year-old kid, whether you're 54 or whatever real age you are, swooping in and telling you what to do. That's not going to work well. Or just washing your hand of it and pretending like it's not happening. That doesn't work well either. So the book tries to give practical strategies and not a one and done approach either.
Yeah. Okay. I want to start getting into some of just walking through, I'll say, the timeline as we would naturally occur it. Before we get there, though, you do say you may think you have time, but you actually don't. Things can happen quite suddenly.
And that's one of the ways in, because of course, we're all very concerned about age and ageism, and we should be. It's the most pervasive form of discrimination in the world and in Canada. We've got great evidence to suggest that. So I have some of these conversations not about being old or, God forbid, getting dementia or something, but what happens in the case of an emergency, right? So if there are people who are out skiing, no matter what age, you say, what if you broke a leg when you were in Whistler? What would we do? Or what if you were traveling somewhere out of the country and I needed to pay your insurance? So trying to make it not necessarily about the broad issue of aging or the fears that we have about that, but actually just thinking about it. This is something that everyone needs to have, no matter if you're 19 or 91.
Yeah, and it's just, again, it's inevitable. We're all going to get there, to your point, and we have to get ready for those thoughts. Okay, I want to start through the journey that I think that somebody would start having, and when they start having maybe more concerns about their parents and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, the first thing that might happen is just, where are they? Can they stay where they are today? And you have a great chapter talking about aging in place. What needs to be true for that to actually work?
So I literally go through your entire house, whether that's rental accommodation, a condo that they own, the big family house with 3 floors, right? Whatever version it is. And first thing I'll say is, your instinct, if you're one of those swooper in people, to move that person out across the country and close to you, bad idea. It almost never works well. In fact, they decline very quickly. Social isolation sets in. Everyone's miserable. It almost never works. Can they stay there longer than you think? Absolutely, they can. So many people will also think, well, we need to go into long-term care. Well, first of all, that's not a reality. That's not what happens. It's a medical decision. So how do you go through the house? What are some of the top hacks that you need? You know what? If it is that big family house, and it's not stairs that are the problem, it's falling that's the problem. Let's fix the falling, right? Put double banisters on with good braces. You're out $100 maybe. Reduces falls risk by 56%. And that really matters because if you fall, your chances of dying in the first year is about 24% as a Canadian senior and almost 50% in the second year. Don't have a main floor bedroom? You know that dining room that no one's eaten at since 2005? Maybe take out those beautiful pieces of furniture with all the old dishes, put some sliding barn doors, and all of a sudden you've got a bedroom that you can work with. So lots and lots of hacks to stay in the house.
One of the two, and it's funny, one of the ones I was looking at, as I mentioned, I've got all the highlights here, even handles. Like you talk about the fact that having the right handles makes a difference. Maybe just tell us about what you found.
When we have those little doorknobs, or those little round knobs that we see in kitchen cupboards and so on. So first of all, why do we need things to open anyway? Or what does the opening look like? In the kitchen, just take all of the front doors off of them and people can reach into open shelves. Solves a huge number of problems. When you have lever handles, you can hit your knob or you get your hand around them. What you're trying to deal with is something that's not about dexterity or something that you can reach to if you happen to be holding a cane or an assistive device.
I actually saw a video, and I can't remember where I saw it yesterday, but of some Japanese nurses that were training in age outfits where they
Yes.
restricted their mobility and they had them, more hunched over and, obviously some, very late stage aging just to make them
Yeah.
aware of what it's like with all the ways they're trying to interact with people and places.
And one of the most important things is those sensory deficits are one of the easiest things to overcome. Not, dementia is one thing, but let's just talk about the fact that about 1 in 4 people over the age of 65 have profound hearing loss. And some of us younger than that also, right? And over the age of 80 and 85, it's about 1 in 2. But we don't really do hearing tests. Now, with the new AirPods you can put in, they do pretty much instantaneous hearing tests. And that's really helpful. When we're thinking about how you can do commercial support, so reading, glasses, older people usually need their eyes checked every 3 months. But now with things like e-readers and so on, you can accommodate around that really easily. So some of those baseline sensory issues are something to overcome. I get people to put some Vaseline on their eyeglasses and wear gloves and try to pull a piece of paper over and try to read what it says or put a little bit of an earplug in. All of a sudden, you have a sense that really talking to your mother in the way that you are, as fast as you are, or getting them to move something like that, it doesn't work. You can solve for that. They don't need to be, sent to the home proverbially at all.
Let me ask you, when you talked about technology though, because that's great, like, AirPods that can help and different things, but we've all been the receiving end of a phone call about, I call IT support, and we all know it
Absolutely.
happens. So how do you kind of, like, that's hard, right? And full understanding. The way technology has changed so
Yes.
much over 10 years. It's so different. So that's hard.
10 years, 2 years.
Yeah.
Part of it's really important to remember. When I sort of feel a little frustrated, sometimes I have to say, is this frustrating? Because I also think it's frustrating. Anyone who's got a new phone or new computer, or they changed an operating system and all of a sudden you can't find the things that you used to find, that's irritating to everyone. User experience is often not designed for older people. And it is important to remember that seniors do use technology overwhelmingly. About 85% of seniors over the age of 85 use technology almost daily, but they may not use it the way that you and I use it. And the increasing things like 2FA and supports around privacy, which is, by the way, very important, it's being downloaded onto the consumer, and that's creating incapability for people who could use capability before. Technology is frustrating to everyone. Ask yourself, and there's a chapter on it, should you be the one fixing it? Maybe you actually hire someone to come in. And I have to say, on the whole, it can be helpful to have somebody close by, because adoption will often fall off when they run into that first or second problem. If you have somebody to come in, and increasingly companies are offering that type of service to older people, it can really save the day.
That is an excellent idea. If I'm going to take one thing, I'm taking that from this conversation. I want to, and sorry, there's so many things here, but just back to the house and just, are you in the right place and aging in the right place? You had this great point about less furniture too. And there's
Yes.
a whole lot of things about decluttering and getting rid, but just also less things to bump into and less things to trip if something happened, like make room.
Make room and really understand that people's lives are around them. Some people have that Swedish clean gene. I'm not one of them. I like my things. One of the challenges I had with somebody who really had this beautiful carpet, and it was very historical and important to her and her family, but it was a massive falls risk for her. And she was in a retirement home, and they were really running into this problem by saying it's too risky. Finally, we just thought about it a different way. Does it have to be on the floor? Can we hang it up? So understanding what is the problem we're trying to solve for is the most important question, because it lets us come at things in different ways. And the disrespect often we feel about other people's things, imagine how you feel if someone came through and cleaned out your house without your expectation. So
Yep.
there's chapters on how to do it and still say, well, if not friends, at least, having dinner together.
It's so great. I love that, hanging the carpet up. I had a friend, believe it or not, a mutual friend, we're not going to say their name, but you might know who I'm talking about, who ran marathons. And instead of T-shirts that piled up forever, he just took pictures of them and put them in a frame. Like, that's the point. You want to preserve the memory, not take up space with stuff. Okay, let's talk about, let's say that, you've thought about some things about your parents aging in place. Now you need to decide that, does your parent need more help? And you've got some signs here, very explicit ones, on how you know that something more is needed.
Again, let's start with what is the problem you're trying to solve for. It may all end up with coming to something like a retirement home or a seniors living home, but let's be intentional in what we're trying to solve for. If it's loneliness, you're going to be seeing that a person maybe hasn't had any conversations. Maybe they're talking to people on the phone a lot that they shouldn't be talking to, i.e. scam artists who really understand that older people sometimes are alone with no one to talk to. If they're starting to not go out and see people anymore, maybe there's an incontinence issue, maybe it's a driving issue, but really what you're saying is they're alone, and that's the problem we're trying to solve for. So we should look for them changing some of those things that were important to them and withdrawing. That is a big red flag on that. The next red flag on it is when the house you can't keep it up. You just can't keep it up. Now, again, what's the problem you're trying to solve for? If you want to stay in the house, maybe you have a Golden Girl style, which is a big trend people are doing. Maybe you have a student move into your house. They call it the Canada Home Share Program. There's different ways of thinking about that. Same with paying bills. If they can't afford to stay in their own house, maybe there's ways of getting that problem to solve for. If you are starting to see, however, that they are falling and very confused, and particularly those two things together, those are your cues that you're down a path that you really need to take quite seriously. And that often ends up with more support. And people say, well, I'm just going to get more home care. Well, great. Most people don't realize it costs about $300,000 a year in an urban center to have 24/7 care. And that's just with like a personal support worker, not a nurse or a doctor.
Right. So that's, something we have to kind of layer into this, where often is actually one of the first things people think about is what can I afford? What makes sense? What resources are available to you?
And there's often a lot of resources. Again, asking the problem, what are we trying to solve for? Many community-based services will help in some of those things that medical home care don't help. You know what? It's the snow shoveling that's a big problem. I can't get out of the house because I can't shovel the snow. Well, actually, there's tons of local programs that will help you do that. Some even just the neighbors can give you a hand. Lots of community-based services can assist, and we often don't think about that, particularly when, retirement homes are really expensive. And in some jurisdictions like Ontario, there's no coverage for them. In other jurisdictions like BC, there can be some coverage if on a needs-to-pay basis, but you need to have a conversation with your financial advisor about what is the actual cost, not of dying, we're better with wills. What's the cost of the last 5 years of life?
Yeah. You talk about as well, when you mentioned the signs, I wanted to explicitly say a few because I think they're useful for people to evaluate when they're working with their parents. You said, you're not getting around. That's a bit of a problem. You said mention the snow shoveling, but also things look wrong, maybe in the house. Things smell wrong. Or
smell wrong is a big one.
Yeah, and stuff isn't working. So the smell piece, that could be the fridge to other things, right?
The toilet's not working. Don't use that toilet. I'm using the other one. Oh, I don't use the shower anymore. I'm using a bath. And you're thinking the bath is kind of dangerous, right? Oh, I'm just eating sandwiches now. These are often things because you're not connecting in your mind about how the problem is presenting itself, my toilet isn't working, with how you might go about fixing it. I might call a plumber. I might, unplug it myself. Or I don't have a sense about the cost. And so you just start going around problems. And the more you do that, you can really get a red flag. I always say, offer to make a cup of tea or, get a drink for them from the fridge. Get into the fridge. Is there anything in the fridge? Or is there lots of food that's unopened? Right? These are some of the issues that you should be starting to pay attention to.
Okay. So let's say, I'm going to use a close friend I know who's going through something themselves where they've identified there is a problem and now they're trying to actually, do the work to try and figure out how to help. The conversations aren't going really well, and these are, often, and same with my parents, and I'm sure yours and others, these are independent individuals who have built lives for themselves, sometimes very successful, and it's embarrassing. So how do you start to kind of work your way in and build the trust to do more?
In the book, I literally have scripts, right? If your dad is super proud and stubborn, try this script. If your mother is evasive and doesn't want to confront and is constantly redirecting, try this version. And there's often an option that's called like the nuclear option. And sometimes, everything else isn't working and you really do have to kind of lay it on the line. We try to preserve those for the last. Ask yourself, what have they always been like and are they different now, right? So if your dad was always forgetful, is he forgetful in a different way? If your mother was always evasive, is she evasive in a different way? And that's important to remember because we become more versions of ourselves. Think about what is the lever that works with them. So lever that works with my mother, shh, mom, don't watch. Guilt. I could say things like, I know, mom, I know you're probably fine, but I'm always worried if you fall or, I know that you don't need those external handrails outside the house with the slippery ice. I know that, but your friends, they're getting older. My mom is 88. Friends are getting older. It would be nice if they could get in, or maybe we could do a ramp, like one of those removable ramps. I'm sure you're fine, but your friends could then come. And right now it's embarrassing that they can't come to their house, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all true. I'm not lying to them, but it's also a lever in. My dad, it's all about, tax planning or, what I'm giving to the government or what kind of getting my things in order. And so for him, I'm having conversations, Dad, it's almost tax season and I've got to go through all these things together, my estate plan and the bankers are talking to me about stuff. First of all, I'd love your advice. You know what parents love to give you? Advice, as opposed to me telling you what to do. Can you show me what you've done? I'd love to learn from you. Then you have a look at it and you're like, that's 20 years out of date. Hey, you know what? I would love your advice. Maybe you could introduce me to your person at the financial institution. Maybe we can do it together. That is also a correct way in. It's dignified for all of you. The last thing I'll say is sometimes you can have proxy conversations, right? Not directed, but you could talk about what your mom's friend is doing and how that's going. And she'll say, oh, well, like her daughter took her to that terrible place. Or, are you worried about the fact that it costs a lot to have home care or that cleaning person? So sometimes you can have conversations about people in their lives. But really what you're having is a conversation that is not front and center, but getting you to where you need to be.
That's such great advice. And I, again, encourage people to read some of the conversations and the insights just to figure out the way that makes sense for your situation. What if you have... and I'm going to I was asking somebody before I came on, what are some different ways? What if you have a toxic, I'll put that in quotes, relationship between parent and child? Because, not everybody, and who knows the circumstances, has even that ease that you just talked about. What do you do in those situations?
I am so grateful that you brought that up because one of the biggest inhibiting problems is this idea of the ideal family. And it's like an old person's hand and a young person's hand and their, one caregiver's journey. That's not the experience of most people. So you may hate your stepfather. You may have always hated your stepfather. You may have had no connection with your mother since you were parted when she was 40 years old and you were 10 years old, but you're the only one left. What's your responsibility? How do you process that? What if the relationship is culturally informed? So what if you come from a culture where there's certain cultural expectations, but your partner doesn't share that culture, and all of a sudden those expectations that mom's going to move in and your partner's like, oh, absolutely not, right? So again, it's really important to be thinking about what are your boundaries, and I'm not going to use like psychobabble on this one, but there's a whole kind of check I do. Are you the right person to be doing this at this time? And there's a list of tasks at the beginning, and you can actually go through them and say, this probably needs to be done now or soon. Who could do it? You know what? Maybe the in-person stuff isn't good because you actually have a really bad relationship, but you're handy with the app that is needed to do. So maybe you assist with finances on your phone, and that's your contribution. And you're not the person that's taking mom to whatever faith community because you've got toxicity around that. The last thing I'll just say is one of the chapters on guilt. And it's not just don't feel guilty, it's examine what you're feeling and what it's telling you. There's such a thing as good guilt. It's usually your unconscious kind of twigging you to something and then trying to understand as you're going through the guilt, like nobody can do everything. And we're not a sandwich generation. We're a club sandwich now. We have 5 to 6 generations. So let's also unpack this idea that everything's going to happen in some kind of age order. It's just not true. Your 95-year-old dad could be making decisions for his 73-year-old son, and he could be a grandfather or a great grandfather. Let's think of it in a more integrated way rather than this sort of age-based linear fashion. It doesn't work like that in real life.
It's so good too, just for all this is like when you're in it, it's just sometimes to take a beat, get out of it, think. Like just take a moment to kind of examine what's actually going on because again, so much of this is emotionally charged when you get there. And I haven't even gotten to, I think, the even some of the more complex things yet. So we'll get into more as we go. But just even this last situation, we've been talking about if it's, basically a one-to-one, one parent, they're dealing with one person. Now, let's say it's one parent and 4 siblings,
Absolutely.
and then how do you manage that? And I know lots of situations, Laura, and I know you wrote about it, where, the single sibling who's close by, maybe who doesn't have children is the one who often,
Absolutely.
and sometimes it's just like how work is divvied out and how plans happen. It's not clear and not great for everybody involved.
Absolutely. So first of all, map out what are those underlying themes in your family. Is it gender norms? Is it cultural expectation? Is the first child supposed to do something? Are the girls supposed to do something? So pull that out and really bring it to the fore. Even if you've worked through that for years, that's what you're going back into. So map out what your family's underlying currents are and kind of just sit with that a minute, right? See how that feels for you. Often there's a lot of rage around it. The next thing is, what are the danger points that you're worried about? It's not unusual. It's the unsuccessful son in the basement, right? That's probably the person that least should be handling the money or least should be doing it. But as a result, mom can stay home. So there's kind of a risk threshold about having him there, but also it's keeping her where she wants to be. So sometimes you have to pay attention to what those trade-offs are. The last thing I'll say is this, I'm not worried about those families that do everything fine all the time. I'm worried about the 99% of other people who are trying to work it through. And again, in the book, there's checklists. Like, what are you good at? If you're the accountant, right? Maybe you want to do the finance stuff, but also pay some attention. You might be so worried about risk thresholds that the everyday stuff isn't getting done. Well, we need to save, but mom needs shoes, right? So you can go through it and divvy it up. And the last thing I would say is figure out what you can afford to have done and where dignity lies in doing it. Really important to remember, parents mostly don't want help from their kids. They want to hang out with their peer group, and they exchange and trust their peer group more than they trust advice from their children. And that makes sense. That's what we as adults typically do, right? You check in with your friends to hear what their experiences are. So don't just assume that actually your advice is the best advice anyway. And maybe if you have an opportunity to talk to their friends, have a cup of coffee, see people over, have a coffee clutch, whatever it is. You can understand what the social context is in their groups, divvying things up, and maybe that you can use that as a prototype.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's another lever that you were talking about is getting, talking to the friend groups and finding out, maybe planting some seeds or asking some questions and maybe just doing a bit of listening too, because that was the one thing that I really liked about you wrote is just the importance of dignity. We all know how, I know how I want to be treated when I'm older. I hope my son eventually listens to this, but, and so it's having these conversations with your parents in a way that they feel dignified or they feel respected in terms of what they're doing.
And who they are, right? And who they are and what's important to them. Building on that point, it's important to let not just you grow from 17 to 54 in their minds, but to understand that when you see somebody who's 90 years old and you're trying to resonate because the last time you lived with them, you were, say, 40 years earlier, that they could have different priorities too. And so part of what we need to think about when we're trying to be supportive, whether being supportive means exiting from the whole thing or leaning in, is are we trying to hold our parents to our idea of who they are and who they should be? That is important as well. And what we're seeing is the biggest divorce trend is women over the age of 65. And they're often saying, you know what? I've done this for a long time. I actually want to do something different. And that's a bit of a shock to the system and a financial impact for the family as well.
Yeah. What are some things to think about on that front? I mean, again, with aging parents, and we've talked about a gray divorce
Yeah.
a few times, but what are the dangers that you see that maybe come out of that, and maybe some of the benefits?
The family assets are a real thing, right? It's more expensive to live alone. Just ask
Yeah.
anyone who's trying to pay taxes, a solo person who's trying to find, what household expenses are. It's more expensive to live twice than live once
Yep.
together as a couple. When we're thinking about it as well, part of again, I go back to that. What is the problem we're trying to solve for? It may be that the behavioral aspects that you're seeing in your partner, let's just say it's my husband. If I'm seeing him act in a different way, he's becoming a real jerk. He's not, by the way, he's absolutely lovely. But imagine he's becoming a real jerk, right? And I'm just saying, I'm fed up with this. I'm not going to deal being treated like this anymore. I'm 75 years old and I'm out of here, right? Is it an undiagnosed urinary tract infection or kidney infection that's causing cognitive impairment due to delirium? Is it that there's actually an organic brain shift in terms of cognition? Many people don't realize that the early signs of dementia are showing up about 10 years before any health conversation is had. And some of the dissonance that you may get, or the lassitude, they're hanging out on the sofa, they won't go anywhere, or that reaction, that may actually be an aging condition. And so part of it is to understand, what's going on, and let's try to weed out any health issues before we start making life decisions like, that's it, I'm leaving you.
How do you manage for that? Because sometimes getting in to see a doctor regularly can be
Yeah.
challenging for those who are mobile and in charge of their own schedules and logistics. It's hard for many people who are just listening.
And 1 in 10 Canadians don't have a family doctor.
Yeah,
also, right?
And you're also mentioning, I think you said earlier, I think that your hearing check, what was it supposed to be every 3 months? I think you said when you get older, but the reality is checking for all those things you mentioned, like a bladder infection or what those things. How do you do that?
Both it's hard and there can be good news. So first what I would say is, what is and I'm using a short form of parent, it really can be any person that we're talking about here. What is their attitude to the healthcare system anyway? I don't love going to the doctor, but I love to tell other people to go to the doctor. Absolutely, right? So there's a little bit of, have a thought about what that person likes and which healthcare professional they feel the most comfortable with. While they trust their healthcare professionals, particularly their doctors, interestingly, one of the best set of relationships that doesn't trigger that white coat syndrome and is more accessible, the magic of the community pharmacist. I have to tell you, they're often going. In fact, many older people are on lots of medications, on average between 8 and 12. And they trust getting a meds review. And I have a whole chapter on how to do a medication review, because what happens is people they don't get all their medication, or if they forget to take their medication, or they're taking supplements that are actually undoing the effect of or they're drinking grapefruit juice, which is also having an impact on their medication. But a trusted pharmacist is a magical way in. And sometimes they'll say things like, we should probably just get some tests done. You might want to get your blood work done. Getting a basic panel. These types of things can be managed from the community up. And the other point is then there are things like vaccines. Fall is flu season. It's a great time to get a bunch of other things done at the same time, right? So bundling those up against a reason that they would already be going to a healthcare professional, very important.
What about again, if we kind of pick up from where I said, we're aging in place, trying to figure it out with a family and how to do it. How do you decide that, or what is the thought process one should go through to evaluate that maybe that the parent needs more than what can be provided aging in place, or can't afford? Well, you talked about it. $300,000 a year is a lot of money.
I don't know a lot of people who can write that check very easily on an annual basis. Look, first of all, it's important to remember, we often get really anxious, but we don't get a lot of advice. And so whether you're in a community that's an urban community and you've got a fairly easy access to a review in Ontario, many people will know the old name is called the Community Care Access Center. If you're in BC, it's a different health entrance. In Quebec, it's got a different way in as well. But there's always a number that you can call and actually phone and schedule an appointment. And anyone can do that to have a wellness check and a check of what we call, this is where we get into acronyms, which I hate, activities of daily living, or even the independent activities of daily living. And what that means is they go through, can you do your banking? Can you do toileting? Can you get up by yourself? Can you get around? Can you travel by yourself? And you can get some baseline on that. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going into long-term care. It might mean that you get a magical physiotherapist to come and support you, or an occupational therapist to help you look at your house or change some recommendations of your bathtub. And what's nice about that is it does baseline where that person is and connects them often to services. And again, if you've got a concern, I'm a huge fan of the First Link program by the Alzheimer's Society. If you're worried about cognition, the First Link program is an easy access point across this country to services, but you got to reach out a little bit.
What are the big ones to watch out for? I mean, you talk about the D's in your book. So what should we listen for?
So we go straight to dementia, right? Everyone always goes straight, aging and dementia. And that's the thing that we're most afraid of. And it's important, don't get me wrong. But let's talk about all the other things that are D's before we go to dementia. So delirium, we talked a little bit about that. I often ask people when they're saying someone's acting a bit funny or off or forgetful, like, have they had any surgery? Often people will say no. And then I go through what I mean by that. Have you ever been given a big anesthetic in the last however long, 6 months? Oh, well, I had a root canal, or yes, okay, that would count. Or I had something. So what many people don't realize is that delirium, which you can get as an older person very easy after you've had kind of a surgical intervention, which doesn't mean necessarily you've had your organ taken out. It could be anything really. That can be up to 6 months of onset, right? So let's just be clear. Let's make sure they don't have a fever or urinary tract infection, kidney infection. They don't show up in men the way that women have had joyful experiences with them over the years. And so they may not identify that. They don't need Alzheimer's Society. They need some cranberry juice and some sulfa drugs, and they'll be better in a few days. So let's go with delirium. And then, of course, I always say, worry about driving as one of the other D's as well.
Yeah, that's understatement. Let me ask you then, you are in a situation where you decide, for some of the criteria you listed earlier, about, this is something, or this is a situation where this person needs more. When should you start making phone calls? How do you even start thinking about long-term care for a parent? Where do you begin?
So really, such an important question that's so emotionally charged. First of all, almost nobody puts their hand up and says, yeah, I really am so excited about going into a nursing home. So please understand that if you're asking people what they're most afraid of in terms of aging, they'll say things like dementia and, having to go into a nursing home. And okay, so let's understand these are very emotionally charged issues. The next thing we have to remember is in Canada, if you're moving into some type of congregate care setting, there are some things often we call a campus of care model, right? You might move into a tenancy. It's just a senior's apartment. Maybe there's a bit of extra help you can get from home care services. And then maybe you can move to a different floor or a slightly different building and you get more help, like a retirement home, assisted living, supportive housing. Depending on your jurisdiction, you're going to see if you're paying out of pocket for that or if that's private pay. It will depend on where you live jurisdictionally. And then getting into long-term care, first of all, you don't get yourself into it. You have to qualify. It's healthcare. So whatever your care card is, your OHIP card, whatever it is where you are, that's what you need. That's your ticket to that 24/7 nursing care that's part of our healthcare system. Many people will think that it's free. It's not. You still pay for the housing component, the roof over your head. It's the healthcare it's not free either. You've been paying taxes for it, I'm assuming. But you still have to pay for the roof over your head unless you're in an income bracket where that gets waived for you. So you'll end up having to go through the healthcare system. Even if you're in a retirement home or seniors living home, you still have to go and check in with usually your local health authority and get that process started. Depends on where you are. If you're in Manitoba, the last time I looked, there was about 400 people on the waiting list. If you're in Ontario, last time I looked, was about 60,000 people on the waiting list. So you may need to make some local decisions as well. They may want to stay in their rural area, but there may not be a long-term care home anywhere close by. But they may end up saying, well, I do want it. There's a retirement home. It's all private pay. I don't know, maybe I really want to stay in this community, or can I afford that? So there's some hard local decisions people need to make often as well.
Yeah, and that's tough too, because you were saying earlier, I mean, social isolation is one of the
Huge.
biggest thing. And so if you can't be in your community, there's a cost to that, and it's not financial. It's that's hard.
And displacing that person is almost always a bad idea unless you engage in a strategy, and I call it the warming up the pot strategy. So let's just say that you live in Calgary, your mom lives in Burlington, right? But she's never really spent much time in Calgary. Okay, so maybe it's time that you could say, hey, the neighbor's going away to Florida for a month and would love someone to move in and take care of the dog. And gosh, the grandkids would love to see you. Would you ever consider coming out for a week or 2 weeks or even a month? Maybe would you look after their dog? And what you do then is by warming up the pot, or you get an Airbnb, or you make a little suite in your house, or whatever it is that you do, you make local connections, because it's not the moving necessarily. Oh, that's jarring for anyone. It's those loss of loose social networks. You'll probably keep up with your close friends, but you may not know to turn left at that corner store that you always turn at, or say hi to the person in the bank. Financial institutions are a community-based hub, right? And they're really meaningful and important. And we know from research that those close friends, those are important, but we lose those as we age, often from some degree of attrition in health.
Yeah.
Those sort of that group of 5 girlfriends or guys or whatever you're hanging out with, those are important. We need to keep those up, like coffee, lunch dates, golf, a FaceTime, something like that. But in terms of disorientation, it's that loose network. And boy, did we see that during COVID, when people were not in their community saying hi to the guy with the dog that you always see. They get disoriented. And actually, that has a cognitive impact as well as a mental health impact. So warm it up. If you're going to eventually try to talk about moving, let's get them to like that area and know it a little bit before you try to approach that.
I want to touch on this one, and it's a hard one about because around mental capacity and things you need to keep in mind. Like if people are moving in that direction, maybe just talk about kind of what when someone is cognitively impaired, like when you've gone through the list you just said, like it's not, a bladder infection, it's real. Exactly. So what do you need to do? And you have this great list, and it was very jarring for me when I read it. If you have somebody declared that they don't have mental capacity, and what the rights that they lose when that happens.
When we talk about what it means to have someone declared incapable, right? Incapable of what is always the first question, because it may be that there was an assessment done that they are not able to do, I don't know, investment banking, but they can still do the routine banking, or they're incapable of making their personal health decisions. Well, is it complicated surgical decisions, but they can still put a Band-Aid on themselves? So let's remember, we're trying to take away the rights as little as possible. But you lose everything, right? You lose the right to make your decisions about your money, where you travel, often if you can drive a car. So you really lose every aspect that is a civil right if you have this broad notion of incapacity. So we always try to make sure that we're just trying to take away that smallest bit, because people lose who they are. Many people don't realize that we have very few folks with the proper documents in place. Many people will think that their will helps them if they become incapable, and it's just not true. You need to have a document. They're called different things in different jurisdictions, but they're all the same kind of thing. They're a decision-making document. We often call them powers of attorney. That if your one document will be for your health and your issues, your personal issues, where you live, what you eat, what medication happens, what healthcare decisions get done. And the other document is for finance. And you need both of those. So then the question is, well, what happens if you don't? Because by the way, 2/3 of Canadians don't have them. 2/3. There's a default list for that health and personal care stuff. It's not maybe who you want. Might be that person you're like, I didn't want them. But eventually it will go to somebody. And if there's nobody, it'll go to the public guardian and trustee, which again, nobody wants. Here's the piece I really want people to learn. Even if you've got a partner, if you've got a spouse, even if you share kind of everything together, assuredly there's some phone bill that's in your name and some gas bill that's in their name, or passwords for an online account or whatever it is. There's no default provision for property decisions. So if if I get hit by a bus, my husband can't, unless I've made that power of attorney for property, that financial document, he can't pay my bills. He can't get into my online accounts. There's no default list. It'll go to the government. It'll go to the public guardian trustee or the public or the curator if you're in Quebec. And also you have to pay for the privilege. Usually when you talk about it like that, that's a lever in to get people to do those documents.
Yeah. And I should say, we spent a lot of time talking about powers of attorney, and it's actually unusual, though I haven't brought it up until this point, but I'm glad you did because we want to get into it. What about if you're on the other side? So I'm thinking about child, parent, should I be their power of attorney? How do you decide which sibling should be the power of attorney? What's the right decision there?
First, sit again. What are the power dynamics in your family, right? And understand what are the types of decisions. In the short form, you can usually do money stuff from afar, but the personal and health stuff, you pretty much need to have a closer physical space. And why I say it's important is, on average, now average, some big sways in this, right? But on average, if you and that person, I'll call your aging parent, but whoever that relationship is for you, are in the same province and territory, you're 400 kilometers apart. And if you're out of province and territory, the average is about 2,100 kilometers apart. So there's a lot of what can I do from away? Because we're probably not just next door the way that it used to be more common. So the book does go through different things you can do, different ways you can participate. But if you're kind of trying to divide it up, someone who lives close by, that health and personal care, you got to lay eyes on the person much better. And I think reframing it as who's good at what, as opposed to I'm choosing who I like and trust, that is helpful. And remember, if you've ever been appointed as someone decision maker, it is not a joy, right? So sometimes you have to think, I don't have anyone in my life to choose. Maybe you and a person that you know kind of agree to do it for each other. The thing I also want people to know, and this is something many people don't know, you don't have to pick your unsuccessful nephew in your basement to do your finances.
Yeah.
Financial institutions have trust services, and it takes away some of those problems about money and lets you just focus in on those health and personal care decisions.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I know many people have done that just because the sibling rivalry, whatever, family dynamics, give it to somebody else, and therefore it's done and there's no debate. I'm coming up against the clock here, but I do want to ask, it's so important, I think, when I think about seniors and, again, experience of people I know and love who've been scammed, who are going through horrible things right now, whether it's, technology, romance, all the ones, any just thoughts of how to manage that? And actually, I'll even say, how do you manage it if you are a child of a parent who you think is going through a scam and the parent is telling you, no, this is legit? It's very hard.
So you see my body language. I'm just reacting to it. So first of all, it's so much worse than we think, right? That's the most important thing that you know. Whenever you see things like the reported numbers are, or the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, bless them, they try to do what they can, but it's massively underreported. And if we're looking at how much we think is lost, it's probably something like $3 billion a year. Overwhelmingly targeted to older people and often targeted to higher education people. So this isn't just they don't know or they're not educated or whatever. So first thing you can do, talk about it yourself, right? You ever got taken by Facebook Marketplace ad? Talk about it at the dinner table. Start talking about how this is normal, how everyone has it, because it is the most important thing. Number two, watch what you say and how you say it. Instead of I cannot believe you fall for that romance scam. There's two pieces to that. I can't believe that. How much those terrible criminals steal from you. It's a very different narrative, right? Number three, one of the big reasons why people don't, if they know that they've been scammed, they don't say anything is, if you're an older person, it's not just that you're ashamed. We're all get ashamed about being taken in. But we're often told that maybe you're losing it. And so the concern is that this is going to lead to some type of mental incapacity review, which, maybe it should be, because credulity, being more credulous, is actually one of those early signs of cognitive impairment that often go missing. If you have somebody, again, talking about it, letting them see it, we do know that the more they see that style, the more that we talk about it, and if we're using the right words that are not blaming the victim, people will come forward. It is a national emergency.
Yeah, it's just tragic, some of the stories I've heard too. So.
And the new AI stuff is micro-targeted, right? So it's not that old romance scam that you kind of think, oh, no, they know everything about you, or the grandparent scam. It's actually your grandchild on FaceTime talking to you. So let's remember how we talk about these things, normalize them. If people have forewarning about what it looks like, we know from the research their chances of falling for it or recognizing it earlier in the stage is much more likely.
Yeah. And it's really important to let them know it's not you, it's them, meaning the fraudsters, right? It's their sophistication, to your point. Laura, I could talk to you for 6 more hours. I'm not allowed. They don't let me do that. But I do have one last question for you.
Sure.
And it's just that what have we not talked about that you think is important for someone to hear who's on this journey right now?
It's not one and done. You don't get to, parent by putting your kids in the car, driving to the soccer game and telling them how to behave what you want them to do, right? It's a series of conversations. Save your powder for certain times. Remember that your own energy levels are going to be important. And then sometimes your relationship dynamic is not helping the situation as well. Find what professional services exist. Make sure you have those on the table. What community services exist? And then come at it again. What is the problem we're trying to solve for? Even if it looks like about a terrible, terrible thing, make sure to ask questions and open up conversations. Nobody likes being told what to do.
Laura, this book is a treasure and you are a delight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth, recorded on September 24th, 2025. The information contained herein has been provided by TD Wealth and is for information purposes only. The information has been drawn from sources believed to be reliable. The information does not provide financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Particular investment, tax, or trading strategies should be evaluated relative to each individual's objectives and risk tolerance. TD Wealth represents the products and services offered by TD Waterhouse Canada, TD Waterhouse Private Investment Council, TD Wealth Private Banking offered by the Toronto Dominion Bank, and TD Wealth Private Trust offered by the Canada Trust Company. All third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are sold by the company or organization named. While these products or services may serve as valuable aids to the independent investor, TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth does not specifically endorse any of the products or services. The third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are available as a convenience to its customers only, and TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth is not liable for any claims, losses, or damages however arising out of any purchase or use of third-party products or services. The TD logo and other TD trademarks are the property of the Toronto Dominion Bank or its subsidiaries.